The final split occurred in 1054. Don't worry about that. But they did split. In the meantime, the Byzantines continued to fight for hundreds of years. Now, folk, again, how long has the fight been going on? This fight that we're fighting with them has now been going on 1,400 years with no end in sight. Oh, there's no other war in history that's lasted that long. None. I mean, hey, the Roman Empire fought against the Persian Empire for some 600 years. But then both of them, well, they wound up being conquered by the Muslims, eventually both of them. But anyway, which takes us up, though, to a problem that they had. The Turks moved in from Mongolia. Now, initially, the first wave of Mongolians was led by Genghis Khan. Now, Genghis Khan was not a Turk. The only thing they had in common was Genghis Khan was a Mongolian, and the Turks who came shortly afterward were Mongolians also. Anyway, Genghis Khan came with his army over the mountains and crossed from Mongolia and essentially made havoc of everything in sight. Backing up a little bit, Genghis Khan actually started off by building up an empire. I'll write his name down. We're going to see Genghis Khan again 2 or 3 times more. I hope I'm spelling that right. We'll see him in this chapter. We'll see that name again either in somewhere in chapters 9, 10, or 11, maybe 9. And we'll see that name again in chapter 12, because his empire, of all the world conquerors, Genghis Khan has 2 things that make him stand out. Number one, is the only one who can be said to have really, truly started out in poverty. I mean, Alexander the Great was the son of the richest king in the Mediterranean world. You can't say he started out in poverty. Cyrus was the son of the richest king in that part of the known world also, so you can't say he started out in poverty. Julius Caesar was a member of one of the upper aristocratic families in Rome. Genghis Khan started out truly in poverty. The other thing that he had that made him unique was he built up the empire that had the largest landmass the world ever seen. Bigger than the United States in landmass, even including Alaska. Bigger than Canada. Bigger, actually maybe not bigger than Russia. But in name, yeah, his empire included all of China, much of Southeast Asia, and in name he claimed all of Siberia. And then it expanded westward and into northern India. So his empire might have been bigger even than the Russian empire that came later, or the Soviet empire that came later. But he built up the biggest empire that had been built by one person. He was also known to be very murderous. He would come into a town. Now, I know he built a few cities like all these conquerors did. And he did not do this in China. But when he went to the Muslim world, he'd come in and just slaughter everyone in sight. In fact, it was so bad that one time he was leaving a town, he thought he'd just burned and slaughtered, but he was told, hey, some of these people who are hiding in basements have come out of the basements and are starting to, they're just starting to look around. He said, well, let's go back and take care of them too. So he turned his men around, went back and finished off the persons who had survived his first onslaught. He did show one twang of conscience one time, though. It was said that after he completely destroyed and burned a city he turned to one of his top aides and said, I wonder if these people will remember someday what we have done to them. Afraid that at some point, maybe some of the descendants of these people would come out and get revenge, even though none of them have to this day. But he came in over the mountains, and his men were the same type of fighters as Muslims, excellent horsemen, except for one thing, he had more organization than did the Muslims. Now, with all due respect, now at the Battle of Tor, Neither side had any organization about it. It was just the Europeans went in against they call them the Saracens, European against Saracen, and a European fighter, I'll call him a fighter, would look around the field and say, hey, who's about my side? He'd pick a Saracen who he thought was a little bit smaller than he was, fight with him. If he dispatched him, he'd move around, look around, who can I find next to fight? He'd fight him, and in the meantime, the Saracens do the same thing, no organization. None whatever, just up and at him was all they'd say to each other. Then at night time, when night fell, the Europeans all went to sleep expecting to fight the next day. If the Muslims did not go to sleep, the Saracens simply spent the whole night running. And when the Europeans woke up the next morning, the Saracens were gone. So Europe claimed the victory, justifiably so. Which brings me to another point. You might think of the American Indians fighters as being braves, or sometimes called braves, sometimes called warriors. I've never heard them called soldiers. I'm talking about the Europeans in North America. Why don't they call them soldiers? What's the difference? Organization. Soldiers fight as a team. You don't fight one of them. You fight, many of them, you fight them all. They fight as a team. The American Indians fought the way I just described. Go into battle, pick on someone. If they got rid of him, go find someone else to pick on him. And in fact, some soldiers, I don't want to call them soldiers, some of these warriors just go, and didn't even care who they were hacking, just start hacking away in all directions with no care about who they were hacking out, no discipline, no organization, whatever. Anyway, Genghis Khan was organized. He had his horsemen organized into squads of 10. Also, these men were very, very toughened up, having already conquered, Genghis Khan having already conquered Mongolia, then turned around and conquered China. And folks, that was a big misstep on China's part because the Chinese outnumbered him something like 10 or 20 to 1. But the Chinese are under a socialistic dynasty, and folks, this can happen. Under a socialist who valued art, valued music, valued a show of wealth, a display of how good they were, how well dressed they were, and did not value military spending. The result was this dynasty lost Tibet. That should have been a warning. Well, we can do without Tibet. And next thing they do, the Mongolians came in and conquered them. Where was their army? Running like crazy in all directions. What happened to the general? He poisoned himself, committed suicide. This you can read about if you read in detail about Genghis Khan. Again, the Chinese had a trained army. No matter how great Genghis Khan was, he was mortal, he was limited. The Chinese could have stopped him. They were not organized to fight. And folk, that is the way oftentimes uncivilized people, and I'm going to consider Genghis Khan semi-civilized. He couldn't even read or write. He and his uncivilized Mongolians defeated the Chinese, who had much greater population than he did. So these men were so tough. To give you some idea, when they crossed the cold mountains on their way to the Middle East, to the Muslim world, they nourished themselves by grabbing either the horse or the pack donkey. And if this makes you sick, I'm sorry. They'd open up a vein of the donkey, suck some blood out of the vein until they felt nourished, close up the vein of the donkey, and then a few hours later, when they wanted a little bit more nourishment, they'd open up the vein of another one of our horses maybe, suck the blood out of it, and then close up the vein so the horse could survive and go on. They had about 2 or 3 horses apiece. In other words, that way they could guarantee they could outrun their enemy because the one horse was riding empty and the other horse they were riding on. Well, when the horse was riding they were riding on and got tired, they simply transferred the other horse that was riding empty, and they could outrun their enemy when they had to run, or they could pursue their enemy if they decided to pursue him and their enemy had no chance of escape. This was something about Genghis Khan. Anyway, he was followed shortly afterward by the Turks, who also were from Mongolia. Oh yes, something else we must mention about Genghis Khan and the Turks both. As they came across, they might not have been aware, but a certain rat was following them. And this rat, this species of rats, carried fleas that was to bring the Black Death to Europe and destroy 1/3 of Europe's population. That's how the Black Death got into Europe in the first place. Now, they were helped a lot by climate change. I mean, folks, the climate in this part of the world cooled, which helped destroy both the Chinese, Mongolians, and the Europeans, and may have decimated the population of North Americans, but we don't know that for sure. But it was climate change, but a climate change in reverse, climate cooling, at least the climate cooling of the northern hemisphere. Anyway, now the Turks, folk, would have destroyed Islam, except that they liked Islam so well that they conquered them, the Turks did, and they set up a country here called Turkey. That's why the third Turkey is its name. But then the conquerors took up the religion of the people they conquered. They became Muslim themselves. Otherwise, Islam might have come to an end right then and there. All right. Yeah, your book talked about the Seljuk Turks. Just worry about the name Turks. There actually were two different branches of Turks, and yes, they were related. But well, right now we'll just call them Turks. Make it a little bit easier. Which takes us up to the next event of importance. Oh yeah, here's where that you run into the word assassin. Basically, the assassins were a group that would go around and try to kill enemy leaders. And they would do it by grabbing some really, really poor young boys, and they'd plant a real paradise, what looked like a cool paradise, a place with trees and grass that they artificially water. And they had a whole lot of highly attractive young girls around. They take these boys and say, hey, this is paradise. But you're not here yet, but you go and kill this certain leader, and if he kills you or his followers kill you, which they probably will, you'll be coming right back to this place. This actually occurred, and the leader was called the Old Man on the Mountain, and he operated from what is today Israel. Eventually his son rose up and overthrew him, but then that one, eventually a caliph drove the assassins into India, where I suppose their descendants are still there. But we get our word assassinate from the cult of the assassins. People who went around trying to kill other people's leaders. Now, the Turks took on the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire were no match for the highly trained, highly skilled, hardened, uncivilized Turkish warriors. And the Byzantines were routed. So the Byzantines then lost almost all this territory here, and that left their empire really, really small, but left it in Europe. They lost what we call Asia Minor. So at this point, the Byzantine emperor turned to the west for help. Emperor Alexis, don't worry about the name now, but I will give it to you later. What we're about to talk about, folk, is the Crusades. The Crusades started at this point when the Byzantine emperor asked Pope Urban, will you please send an army over here and help me? I'm about to be wiped out. And that began the Crusades. Before